Hi everyone! We're going to go ahead and get started with today's pre-recorded webinar, Best Practices, Sanitizing the Air and Surfaces from ISSA in partnership with Normie. Welcome. We are absolutely thrilled you're here. I'm your host, Hannah Oates, and on behalf of ISSA and Normie, I welcome you. So before we get started today, let's go over a few housekeeping items. We are doing a live Q&A session today, which is really exciting. So those of you that are logging in or tuning in on your computer will have the availability to type in questions. You should be able to see a little question box on your screen. So please feel free to utilize that throughout the presentation. We are monitoring the questions, so we'll try to get as many questions answered as possible in our session today. But please note, we will be holding all the answers until after the presentation is over. So when the presentation ends, Doug will come back on for a live Q&A session, and then we'll be answering and asking all your questions. So a little bit about Doug before we get started today. He's the Executive Director of Normie, National Organization of Remediators and Mold Inspectors, and author of Mold-Free Construction. Normie and ISSA have formed a strategic alliance so that each of its memberships can benefit from the services and training each organization offers. Normie formed in 2004 and has become a leading training provider in the mold industry and gains its credibility from the 5 states that now offer licensing for mold professionals. With that, everyone, please welcome Doug. Take it away.
Hello, welcome to our class. My name is Doug Hoffman. I'm the Executive Director of Normie, which is the National Organization of Remediators and Mold Inspectors. We're a training organization, a certifying agency for mold professionals throughout the United States. We actually started in July of 2004, started doing training on the first licensing law for mold professionals, and that was for mold remediators in the state of Louisiana. That was in 2004. Since then, several other states and municipalities have come on board, and we are the training provider for Texas, Florida, Louisiana, District of Columbia, and New York. They're the only 5 that actually regulate the mold profession. We were invited by ISSA to become a strategic partner with them in the training of indoor air quality issues because from the beginning, we trained on mold as an indoor air quality problem. If you think about it, it was kind of interesting because mold at each of its 4 stages is one of the 4 major components, what we call the toxic soup, of indoor air quality problems. At spore stage, it's floating around in the air, so it's a particulate. It is, of course, an organism. It grows, so it's a biopollutant. It's also, when it begins to grow, puts off VOCs and gases, in some cases mycotoxins, and it smells. When it's growing, it smells musty. So mold really does become, in a lot of ways, a surrogate for many of the other indoor air quality issues. We talk about this all the time in this way, that if you remove the mold from an indoor environment, successfully remove it, you are actually cleaning up the environment in a lot of different ways. And I guess the example that I use that most people really connect with is if you have a mold spore floating around in the air and you're using a AFD or air filtration device as an air scrubber to filter the air, it's not going to take the mold spores and leave everything else in the air. It's going to take everything, the pollen, the dead skin cells, everything above 0.3 microns. It's going to take it out of the air. If you're wiping down a surface that has some mold on it, you're using a good biocide, which is obviously anything that would kill biological contaminant, it's not going to kill the mold and leave the bacteria. The point is that it's going to keep that surface clean and really kill all the microorganisms. And so in a very real way, mold does become a surrogate for many other indoor air quality issues. So today what I want to talk about is I want to talk about best practices for sanitizing air and surfaces, because the protocols that we utilize, not only in the mold industry, but also in effective cleaning, can be holistic, by way of cleaning both the air and the surfaces. And so that's what I want to talk about today, best practices for dealing with and sanitizing the air and surfaces. I want to start by talking about a couple of quotes that I've found interesting in regards to indoor air quality. OSHA says that poor indoor air quality can be a common problem in workplaces because employees spend a large portion of their day at work, and indoor environmental quality of work facilities can have a noticeable and sometimes chronic effect on employee health. And we're going to talk about that, this connection between indoor air quality problems and people's health. And specifically as facilities maintenance directors or employers, we need to be very aware of what our employees are talking about in regards to their health, because those health issues that they're facing may be as a result of the environment that they're working in. I often say in our classes, if you get a headache when you go to work, it might not be the boss. It might be some environmental issue. And so we as employers need to be conscious and aware of what those health issues might be. It goes on to say typical undesirable air quality conditions include poor ventilation, mold exposure, temperature and humidity extremes, and potential exposure to workplace chemicals. These conditions may lead to frequent headaches, lethargy, cough, and have the potential to cause more serious conditions like asthma and pneumonia. And those are really two different things. One is sick building syndrome, the other is building related illness. And we'll define each of those in just a few moments. So you'll see what the differences are in those kinds of issues that might result from our poor indoor air quality in our environments. The EPA says, and this is talking about houses, but it also applies to office and commercial environments, some health effects can be useful indicators of an indoor air quality problem, especially if they appear after a person moves to a new residence, remodels or refurnishes a home, or treats a home with pesticides. Think about this from a commercial standpoint. We just moved one of our companies into some new offices and larger offices. Painting issues that we didn't have before, painting odors, carpet smells, a lot of things that are going on in this new facility that was not in the other facility. And we've got to figure out how to deal with that and clean it in a way that we're dealing, again, holistically with both the air and the surfaces. It goes on to say, if you think that you have symptoms that may be related to your home environment, discuss them with your doctor or your local health department to see if they could be caused by indoor air pollution. You may also want to consult a board-certified allergist or an occupational medicine specialist for answers to your questions. I'll give you a little bit of hint about this. I was actually in a class several years ago in Los Angeles from the Cancer Control Society, and I learned about a whole host of doctors in the Association of Environmental Medicine, AAEM, and those doctors specialize in dealing with environmental issues and how they affect people's allergies. And so there's definitely a connection, and you're going to see as we talk today that they're getting better and better at determining how to tie people's health issues to environments. It's an evolving science, but they're moving closer and closer every day to being able to make those kinds of connections. I want to define some terms, sanitizing, disinfecting, and sterilizing, because I think those terms are used a little bit too loosely. And I want to make sure that as we're talking about sanitizing the air and surfaces, that we are in fact utilizing those terms correctly. So sterilizing is making something completely free from microbial contamination. And I just want to tell you, that's a very, very difficult thing to do. And in most situations, they're not very successful at it. Even in hospitals, keeping surfaces and the air sterile is virtually impossible. And so this is typically done in healthcare settings where contagion and infection are serious concerns. You can imagine what might have to go on in any environment to actually make it sterile. So we're not talking about sterilizing anything. Disinfecting is to destroy or irreversibly inactivate or kill infectious fungi bacteria and viruses, but not necessarily their spores as claimed by the label of a particular product. The EPA regulates disinfectants, as you probably know, and on the SDS sheet, you can find those active ingredients and what the EPA has actually registered. They're the ones who are monitor kills claims, and kills claims are related to the disinfecting that is done when you utilize those chemistries correctly. We do a class that I'm going to mention here shortly called the Certified Sanitizing Professional. And one of the things that we spend a lot of time talking about is the fact that we're really sanitizing, not disinfecting. Disinfecting has to do with specific chemicals that you use, how those chemicals are used, specific dwell times, a lot of detail that is not really discussed much in the sanitization world, which is really what we're talking about today. So what is sanitizing? Well, sanitizing is really based on testing, and it's based on pre and post testing. You take a pre-sample, you implement a sanitization protocol, and you take a post sample. If you've in fact reduced the microbial load on that surface or in the air, then you've sanitized it. You've not sterilized it. You may not necessarily have disinfected it, but you've sanitized it. So sanitization is the reduction, not necessarily the elimination, of microorganisms from an inanimate object, usually substantiated by objective lab testing. And the reason that's important is because you want to substantiate the fact that you've sanitized an environment, but you don't want to over-promise and under-deliver. You've not sterilized it. We're going to talk about the difference between a clean environment and a cleaner environment. That's a huge difference. Clean sounds pretty absolute. We try to talk in terms of comparatives: cleaner, healthier, safer, those kinds of terms. And those you can substantiate that you've sanitized properly with pre and post testing. So what we're going to accomplish today is we're going to talk a little bit about the Normie Professional Practices, which is our best practices. This was written in 2015. It's now become the document for training in all the states that require mold licensing. And the reason they do that is because they require the trade associations to write best practices and to do the training on those practices. And that's what this document is all about, talking about mold assessing and also mold remediation. So we're going to mention that and talk about that for a little bit. But this book is really important. If you don't have a copy of this, I think you really should get it. It's a great book on indoor air quality, written specifically for facilities maintenance directors and employers by Burroughs and Hansen, called Managing Indoor Air Quality. And they set up a 5-phase process that really helps understand what you can do as a facilities maintenance director. And that's really the first 3 phases, phases 1 through 3, before you turn it over to a professional. So there's some things you can do in-house before you have to outsource this to a professional if you're trying to find out if there is even an indoor air quality issue. And then finally, I want to talk about our new training program, the Certified Sanitizing Professional. Some of you will be interested in that to supplement some of the training that you've been doing with the ISSA on cleaning protocols. So what's the key to success? I want to tell you, when you're talking about sanitizing environments, even though we're talking about a holistic approach, which is dealing with air and surfaces, there is no silver bullet. It's about cleaning and doing good air purification and air filtration, scheduled maintenance. There's a lot of things involved. It's about being trained properly and using the correct protocols, and that really is the key to success. One of the things that I talk a lot about is redundancy. You do a lot of things and you do them right, and then if you miss something or you don't do something well, those other things will pick up the slack, and at least you'll get the results that you want. And again, that's a cleaner, healthier, and safer environment. Where are these indoor air quality problems coming from? Now, this, of course, is a house, but same thing happens in our offices, because most of our offices have kitchens, they have bathrooms. We don't typically sleep there, but we do spend a lot of time there. And so a lot of the things that we see in a house, we also see in a commercial building. VOCs, for instance, from perfumes and hairsprays and cosmetics. A lot of dental offices now that you go to, at least that I've been to, will have a sign and ask that their patients not wear perfumes or cosmetics when they come to have their teeth fixed. Well, why? Well, part of it is because people are allergic to a lot of those things, and they want to have a cleaner environment by lowering the VOCs. Good builders that we work with will try to utilize low VOC paint, so there's not as many off gases in that environment, from carpeting and from painting and draperies and furniture and so forth. One thing you might not know is that the paints that we utilize are awfully toxic in terms of off-gassing. And when you walk into a new painted environment, you certainly can tell that because you can smell those styrenes and other chemicals that are there. What we don't think about sometimes is that even when that odor goes away, some of those paints, according to scientists, can off-gas for up to 10 years at low levels that we don't smell it, but no doubt that it's still having its effect on that environment. And then, of course, there's it suggests animals, the dander, dead skin cells that we're producing as humans, dust mites, pathogens that are on surfaces. We're concerned about contact transmission. We should also be concerned about those things being transported on the air, which we'll be talking about here shortly as well. So there are a lot of different problems in our indoor environment. And there's another slide. This next picture shows you kind of how they're generally categorized. But I want to give you, from our standpoint, from an indoor air quality standpoint, when we talk about all the things that could be out there, dust mites, food, chemicals, mold, mildew, tobacco smells. Did you know that a single cigarette produces over 4,000 chemical gases, 43 of which are carcinogenic? So that's a huge problem in terms of creating a toxic environment, especially for people who have allergies or concerned about allergies. So how do we categorize these indoor air quality contaminants? We talk about 7 components of indoor air quality, and it's odors, gases, biopollutants, particulates, temperature, humidity, and air movement or comfort. Those 7 categories, you can take virtually any indoor air quality problem that you see, and you can put it in one of those 7 components. Why is that so important? The reason that's important is because if you're only addressing one of them, you're only taking 1/7 of the solution. And so I can give you this example. If only you're dealing with particles because you've got a good filter, then you're only dealing with 1/7 of the problems that are out there. Proactive air purification technologies will take care of neutralizing VOCs, of gases, of odors. It'll kill bacteria on surfaces and in the air, and it will also remove the particulates. So now you're dealing with 4/7 of the problem. Correcting the relative humidity, making sure that the temperature is correct, that you've got plenty of airflow and air movement. Now you're dealing with all 7. And this is the idea of taking a holistic approach. As I always say about indoor air quality, it's a multifaceted problem, so it needs a multi-strategic solution. And that's the way we want to deal with indoor air quality issues. Let's talk about air movement for a minute, because this is really kind of an interesting thing that folks don't think a lot about. But in commercial environments, and this is a rooftop air conditioning system, and you can see that this has a fresh air makeup coming in here from the left. As the air comes in, it's mixed with the contaminated air that's coming in from here. Hopefully it's filtered or purified, and then it's sent back into the environment. So you've got fresh air coming in from the outside. What are you bringing in with that fresh air? Are you bringing odors? Are you bringing particulates? Are you bringing contaminants? Well, of course you are. And so if you're not treating that before it comes into the environment, now it's going to be brought into the environment. It's going to be circulated throughout the environment. And of course, then it's going to be recirculated back through the air conditioning system. So the idea of an air conditioning system is to primarily dehumidify, but it's also designed, hopefully, to purify the air so that anything that's in that environment, when it's recirculated back through the air conditioning system, is going to provide cleaner, and healthier and safer air in the environment. Obviously, some things are pretty obvious. So you look up at this and you go, yeah, I think the air conditioning system definitely needs to be addressed. Look at this. This might not be quite so obvious. This could be dead mold. It could be live mold. Obviously, a moisture meter test would let us know that, or thermal imaging, infrared, would let us know if that was a moisture problem. It could be an insulation problem. Maybe the box that holds this supply register has no insulation around it if this happens to be an attic. So you might look up and see this, but that doesn't necessarily tell you exactly what the problem is. It could be the air conditioning system, or it could be something else. And of course, that's what a professional assessment is to determine what the issues are and where the issues are coming from. So I utilize this phrase all the time in my training. I think it fits with the medical industry, obviously, and it obviously fits with our industry. And that's this, that prognosis without diagnosis is malpractice. You can't offer a solution until you know what the problem is. And sometimes the only way to find a problem is to do a full-blown indoor air quality assessment. I wrote this article some time ago for CMM, and it's called Look Up. And the point is, it says your facility's infection control issues may be coming from your vents. So we spend a lot of time cleaning surfaces, and we typically have a scheduled maintenance program where we're cleaning the surface. Did you ever wonder where that stuff's coming from? It's coming from the air. In the most part, it's those things that have been floating around in that environment for a while, and now they've settled out in the air. Now they've settled out on a surface. I've used this illustration. It's not really pretty, but I use this illustration a lot. If you look at a shaft of light, you see a lot of specks in there. A lot of those specks are dead skin cells. And so that becomes our dust. About 80% of them, according to scientists, is dead skin. Well, if you go to a movie theater and you look up, what you're looking at through that shaft of light is the dead skin of everyone that's been in that room over the last few days. Not a very pleasant thought, but the point is that's where our dust comes from. How many hospitals have you been in? How many healthcare facilities have you been in? How many restaurants have you been in that you looked up and looked at the supply register and thought, maybe they need to clean their duct system? A lot of the problems, HVAC system is not always the problem, but it is almost always a problem when it comes to contaminations that's in our air and also finding itself now on our surfaces. Sick building syndrome is defined as where 20% of the employees have some type of allergic reaction to that environment, and that's why it's called a syndrome. It may be a cluster of things, and not necessarily all of them sneeze when they go to that area of the office. But as I said, one might have a headache, one might feel tired. It's just that 20% of the employees are reacting to this particular area or to the environment in general. Building-related illnesses, on the other hand, is where you can connect a specific illness with that particular environment. And so Legionella, for instance, is a really good example. Somebody gets Legionnaires, it came from that environment. And so if you could tie that through DNA testing to that specific environment, now you've got a legal issue that you've got to deal with. So it's really important as an HR person to track those illnesses, to track those allergies, people's reactions, be aware, be open, be honest, be listening, because the point is that we've got to make sure that we're aware of those issues before they become issues. And that's really just using your senses, the sight and smell and hearing and touch, not so much taste, but it's being aware of what's there and listening and talking so that you can be conscious of the problem. So this concept that Burroughs talks about in his book, he talks about 5 phases that any type of system should go through or assessment should go through before we actually get to a point where we're offering a solution. But he says the first 3, phase 1, 2, and 3, is something that a facilities maintenance director could do or an HR person could do. And that's the preliminary assessment, the qualitative walkthrough inspection, and the simple quantitative sampling or assessment techniques. That's something you could do in-house. You don't have to outsource it. Doesn't cost a lot of money. We do a lot of consulting for folks and talk with them about what type of DIY, do-it-yourself programs are out there. I'm going to show you one in a second. But what kind of equipment is there that you can take sampling yourself without having to go to the expense of using a very expensive lab? Walkthrough assessment, we've got an assessment process that we can help you with. And we also have a questionnaire that you might consider using to try to begin to find out if, in fact, there's an issue. So Barbara, Alice, and Ann might be given an assessment and say, what do you think about what's going on in this environment? Again, it's awareness. At this point, once you've done that, now you're going to look for a professional, phase 4 and phase 5, and that's going to be a more complex quantitative diagnostics. It's going to utilize some good equipment, some diagnostics equipment. I'm going to show you a couple of things here in a second. But it's also going to be included in that, if it's a solution-based assessment, which is what we do, and what we train on, it's going to take you to the goal of fixing what's there and then creating an environment where those problems are not going to come back. And so it's not about just finding the problem. I mean, anybody can find a problem. It's finding the problem, offering a solution, and then making sure that that problem doesn't come back. Our sanitization protocols always include these 3 aspects. First is green chemistries and cleaning, making sure that you're using the right kinds of technologies and that you're doing the cleaning properly and on the right schedule, which you all know about through ISSA training. Second is, the second component is air filtration and purification. We've got some great training, some of it free, IAQ Basics 101 training to help folks understand the 5 technologies that address air purification and air filtration. There are only 5 technologies that all air purification technologies are made from. It's either a filter, an ozonator, an ionizer, an ultraviolet light, or an ultraviolet light with target plate. So we talk about those and the pros and cons of each and how you would look for the right kind of technology that could address both air filtration and air purification. And then the third component is scheduled maintenance. You got to keep up the program. If a filter needs to be replaced every 90 days, it needs to be replaced every 90 days. And so that scheduled maintenance program is incredibly important, making sure that the maintenance program, that the cleaning program, whatever that is done consistently. Once we've got all this information, and let's say we've skipped now over to the professional assessor. Once he has all this information, he's going to be like Sherlock Holmes. He's going to use his building science background. He's going to use his tools for assessing the diagnostic tools that he needs. He's also going to use his own subjective evaluation of that environment. And he's going to then determine, like Sherlock Holmes, he's going to determine whether we're going to sanitize or remediate. So sanitizing exactly, remember, reducing the microbial load on a surface, that could be wiping it down. Remediation, on the other hand, is if you've got a really big mold problem, you have to tear out the construction material because it's contaminated and wet. That's a remediation process. In our world, from a consulting standpoint and indoor air quality mold assessment, 80% of the projects that we assess don't need to be remediated. They can be sanitized. Now, if you've got visible mold and you've got a certain amount of it, certain type of it, moisture content, so forth, there are criteria that we use for determining whether to remediate or sanitize. But in many cases, you can sanitize. And remember, that sanitization solution is the concept of green technologies, air filtration and purification, and a scheduled maintenance program. We utilize a data sampling interpretation chart to determine whether surfaces are contaminated or not, and we use this on pre and post testing. This is part of our professional practices, and this is just documentation from a lot of different sources to try to set some guidelines, some help, some standard for determining whether an environment is cleaner or not. And that's really the idea of that. This is based on thousands and thousands of samples. We created this microbial load reduction protocol, and this is a brand new protocol that we have put in place over the last several months. And it's not really the details. Obviously, the details are 3 pages of documentation, but I wanted to share this with you because this is part of a training that we're doing now called Certified Sanitizing Professional. And he can go in and he can lower the microbial load on the surfaces and in the air, which is what we're talking about, using best practices, how to sanitize the air and the surfaces. This protocol includes 7 steps. Step 1 you see is pre-screening, and so that's a testing process. Step 6 is post-screening, so that's the before and after, and to prove that the microbial load has been reduced. And then the 4 steps in between are the steps that you would be familiar with, lowering the microbial load by cleaning, and that's the cleaning techniques that you've learned by ISSA or would learn by ISSA of how to remove the dirt and the debris and the junk, because it doesn't do any good to go in and fog a really good antimicrobial or use a T360 to do a really good antimicrobial if it's just covering up dirt. So you need to remove the dirt. That's the cleaning process. Then you put down a really good antimicrobial, which is the preparation product. That's really cleaning the surfaces. And then the protectant is the next step, and that would be applied to create a surface on which mold won't grow. Some of those are nanotechnologies that are incredibly effective. Some of them change the pH so that mold and bacteria and virus won't grow on that surface. But that protectant step is a very important process. And again, we have training that supports all of this. Our certified biocide applicator training goes into a lot of detail about phenols and quats and silated quats. But that's not the place for this, but I'm just telling you that this protocol, again, is based on pre and post testing and then implementing the right kind of cleaning of not only the surfaces, but then the air. So you'll see step 5 is the implementation of air filtration and purification technologies. This particular protocol for our certified sanitizing professionals leads to our NORMI certificate of sanitization, which is issued to the client. And it just simply says that based on the protocols that were implemented and pre and post testing, that particular environment is considered normal or expected ranges. So contamination levels, remember, we're not talking about sterilizing. We're not talking about disinfecting at this point. We're talking about sanitizing the environment, and that's reducing the microbial load in that environment of the air and surfaces. So that's our NORMI certified sanitizing professional. If you want more information about that, that's at events.normi.org, something that you might be interested in. I want to thank you for your time today. I think we've covered a lot of material, but hopefully we've answered some of your questions. But I do want to emphasize at the end something that I think is incredibly important. We're not in the business of proving to someone that we've sterilized an environment. And if someone comes to us and they says, can you guarantee me that there's no mold in this environment? The answer is no. Can you guarantee me that there's not a virus in here? No. Can you guarantee me that this is safe? No. What we can guarantee is based on pre-screening and post-screening, we can sanitize the air and surfaces and prove that we've created a cleaner, safer, and healthier environment for you and for your employees. That's what we're trying to do. And I think that, that we've been successful in doing that. And I hope that we can be of some help to you as we kind of look at this new world and decide how we're going to sanitize our environments so that we feel better about being in a cleaner, safer, and healthier indoor environment. Thank you so much. And we look forward to talking with you again at another time when we can maybe do some more training in more detail. Thank you and have a great day.
And very informative presentation. And thank you everyone for listening and for sending in your questions. We do have a few questions here today. And Doug, if you're ready, we can go ahead and get started with the live Q&A.
I am ready.
Excellent, awesome. Okay, so one of our questions here is, during sanitizing process of workstations, does the micro rag need to be changed at every desk, or how often?
Well, of course, that's a great question. And because of the current concerns about some of the contaminations we're dealing with, especially viruses, they know so little about what's going on right now that it's really, I think, difficult to answer that question. I am not a cleaning technician, and so I'll just tell you this is not in my purview. I think this is something that you would be learning from ISSA and their training programs. And I don't know of any protocols that are set up, but I'm probably not the right person to ask about that. Seems to me that if there is information on that, that's going to be coming out through ISSA and other training organizations that deal specifically more in that janitorial realm.
Excellent. And I can give a little bit as far as some of our training courses specifically for that. If you go to issa.com/CMI, we have incredible certification and training courses that are related to a little more of what you're talking about when it comes to specific products, etc. Our next question here, Doug, is what kind of claims can we make that will keep us out of the litigation ditch?
I think that's a great question. And one of the things that we've been working through with our training program on the certified sanitizing professional is to make sure that they're clear on what kind of claims they can make. And so we're not making claims about any sort of specific microorganisms. But we can make general claims in terms of microorganisms, lowering the microbial load. That kind of terminology is easy to prove by utilizing pre and post testing. You can make claims about lowering bacteria counts, lowering viral counts, although viruses are very, very difficult to test for. And so now you're venturing into a little more difficult area. But I think when you keep it more generic, like talking about microbial loads, that makes it easy for most people to understand. And again, it's about not using absolutes like, oh, yes, we're going to make this a healthy environment. That's very tough to define. We're going to make this clean. Well, define clean. So what we try to do is we try to train all of our professionals to think in terms of comparatives. We're going to make it healthier. We're going to make it cleaner. We're going to make it safer. We're going to reduce the load. All of those claims that I just made are things that you can prove by objective testing. And so that's the way we approach this. And I think that's the safest and best way to actually approach this situation. I know that you're going to be asked. We're asked all the time, what can you do with SARS-CoV-2? What can you do with Stachybotrys? Can you prove to me that you've reduced this? Can you prove that you've reduced that? Can you prove that you've made the place sterile? But that's what we're trying to do, is to be honest and upfront about what we know we can do, be able to prove that we did it, and then not worry about any kind of downside litigation.
Thank you. We have another question here asking, can you repeat the 7 categories of indoor air quality?
I sure can. You can take any contaminant that's floating around in the air in the surfaces, and what you're going to find is there are basically 7 components of indoor air quality, and all 7 of them have to be addressed. And they are odors, biopollutants, particulates, gases or VOCs, temperature, humidity, relative humidity, and air movement. All of those things affect indoor air quality. And just as an example of that, for instance, we talk about relative humidity being between 40 and 60%. When the relative humidity exceeds 60%, goes up above 60%, what you're going to end up seeing is a growth in microorganisms, higher bacterial levels, higher fungus or mold levels. You're going to find out people's allergic reactions typically will actually be exacerbated. So that's just one example of one of these 7 components. So if you're going to address indoor air quality, you really need to address all 7 of them, or you're only dealing with a small portion of what the problems actually are.
Thank you. Our next question here is, are there other trainings that would supplement this presentation?
Yes, and ISSA has some great trainings obviously in place. We have our own trainings in place at normie.org. Some of them are actually showing up now at ISSA. Events.normie.org, the page that I mentioned at the end, has a lot of our different kinds of trainings. And a lot of this has to do with where you want to be in the industry. We talk a lot about becoming an indoor air quality expert. And the reason we do that is because they are few and far between. A lot of people are looking for solutions to indoor air quality issues, and when you begin to understand, as we discussed today, that many of those indoor air quality problems show up on our surfaces, it's not just about keeping the surfaces clean, but it's also making sure that the air is clean. Now you've got a formula for really creating a cleaner, healthier environment, and that training, we have a lot of in-depth training on how that should work. Technologies that work. A lot of questions people ask about ultraviolet light. Is it the right nanometer? Is it actually producing what needs to be produced in terms of germicidal wavelength? What are target plates? What is DBI, dielectric barrier ionizer training? All of this technology training, that's really what we do. And so yes, you've looked at the tip of the iceberg today.
Thank you. We have another question here asking, thank you for this great information. What have you learned about the value of UVC and far UVC disinfection devices?
UVC is an incredibly powerful germicidal wavelength, and when put in the right place, it's a great tool to actually disinfect and to kill microorganisms, all different types of microorganisms. That technology has been so advanced in the last 12 to 15 years that now they've realized that they can put it on a target plate, titanium dioxide typically, produce a hydroxyl type effect. We've also got multi-cluster ionization technology now that actually is better than UVC in terms of not utilizing ozone, but there are no ozone lamps. So there's a lot of great technology out there that's incredibly effective on these microorganisms that we're concerned about. And again, that's part of the training that we do on the IAQ technology side.
We've got another question here following up to Normie's training, asking what is the cost or time frame for Normie's training programs?
Just like most training organizations, we have a lot of training. We have some training that's an hour long. We have some that's 4 days long. So it's just a whole host of different types of training depending on what direction you want to go. And to help you, to make it easy for you, some of that training is free, some of it costs money, just depends on how it's delivered. Obviously, a lot of it we deliver on site, we deliver live online, and some static online classes. And if you go to normie.org, over on the left-hand side, you'll see a blue tab that says training and classes. When you click on that tab, you'll see that we've developed training tracks for you. Mold tracks and indoor air quality tracks, so you can find out exactly what classes you need to take. It starts out with a couple of free classes and exactly what class you should take next. So I think we answer that question if you go to normie.org, click on that blue tab on the left, and we'll be glad to help you get into this industry if you're not already in it, or advance you into the industry if you're interested in that.
Thank you, Doug. We've got another question here. Based on the information we learned in today's presentation regarding bacteria, how long would you say bacteria from a virus like COVID-19 could last on surfaces?
Yeah, that's a very, very difficult question. And I think it's frankly a question that everyone is asking, and I haven't heard an answer yet. I think it's one of those things right now that they're still studying. They're trying to determine exactly how long these things can last on surfaces. It has a lot to do with the environment, even relative humidity and temperature. So it's not a question that I actually would be able to answer.
Thank you. We've got another question here asking, there is a lot of use with fogging equipment. Have you used this in the past for your sanitation or part of your sanitization protocols?
Absolutely, yes. Fogging is a great technique if it's done correctly. Of course, you have to realize that there's cold fogging, hot fogging, electrostatic fogging. There's all kinds of fogging technologies out there, some of them more effective than others. Each of them have their pros and cons. And a class that we teach called Certified Biocide Applicator actually goes into some of the details about that. I believe I mentioned that in the class that you just had, but it's called a Certified Biocide Applicator. And it talks about the advantages and disadvantages of fogging. But it's a very effective tool if it's done correctly.
Excellent. Another question here regarding a specific particle. What do you think about stabilized aqueous ozone?
Ozone has always been a big question mark for a lot of people. I've been in the indoor air quality industry for a really long time. We utilize ozone generators where it's needed. Obviously, ozone is very effective in disinfecting water, and it can also be effective in air as long as we're being safe with it. In occupied space, you're going to deal with it differently than you would in unoccupied space. But in unoccupied space, it's a very effective tool during containment to deal with some of the places that you would not normally be able to get to touch. So again, as long as it's used properly and used safely, that's a really good thing. Most all of the air purification equipment now that's being recommended and that we recommend is no ozone producing equipment, because with the new technologies that are out there, like the multi-cluster ionization technology, the use of ozone is just it's just not necessary. You can accomplish the same thing without it.
Thank you. Another question here. Would you recommend electrostatic spraying disinfection as a good method to control air quality and help the work environment?
Again, yes, electrostatic can be used in a lot of ways. Here's the problem that most people have with electrostatic sprayers, or really fogging in general, is that there is no silver bullet. Remember I said that. And so if, for instance, you're fogging or even electrostatic spraying over a dirty surface, then that's not going to be very beneficial to the environment. So the cleaning process still needs to take place. Unfortunately, some people feel like if they're fogging, they can do what's called fog and spray and pray. They can fog and then walk away and say, ah, did my job, everything's great. And that's just not the case. We always talk about that extra step of the mechanical removal of contaminants before and after any type of fogging process, and that even includes the electrostatic.
Excellent. We have another question here today, and it says, do I have to have special insurance to deal with these current issues?
Yes. Yes, you do. In fact, we work with an insurance carrier on a lot of different incredible insurance programs for our members. And one of the things that we found is just recently in the last, probably the last 2 weeks, 3 weeks maybe, even our insurance carrier is now saying, if you've been in this business and you're cleaning and sanitizing and remediating, don't assume that your insurance will cover you with this particular concern they have now about SARS-CoV-2. So it's one of those things that you need to just contact your insurance carrier, make sure they know what you're doing, and make sure that you're covered for whatever it is that you're claiming.
Thank you. Everyone, we have time for another question or two, so feel free to send in any questions that you have before we wrap up today. We have another question right now, Doug, that says, so if one of my employees was positive for COVID-19, would that virus and that bacteria be in the air and units?
Well, that's a really good question. It's totally possible. I think they're concerned mostly, it sounds to me like, and I'm not a doctor, so I'm only sharing information that I've heard from the news, so I don't know, but it sounds to me like that if they're actively sneezing, it's conceivable that it could continue to be in the air. Other than that, I don't know that I would be qualified to answer that question.
Thank you. We've got another question here, and it says, would you recommend the use of an air scrubber during the disinfection process for particulate removal and spore reduction?
Yes. Yes, yes, yes. One of the things that we talk about, and I think I mentioned this in our discussion, because this has been kind of the story that we've told for a very long time. Any kind of sanitization protocol needs to have layers of solutions included in them. There is no silver bullet, not one thing that you can do that will take care of everything. And so we try to include enough things to make sure that we've got some redundancy in that protocol. Running an air scrubber hurts nothing, because what you're doing obviously is you're trapping everything above 0.3 microns in that filter, and then you can dispose of the filter. Running negative air and making sure that you're moving those contaminants out of the environment, not a bad idea. So I think it's the idea of utilizing whatever you can, and in some ways kind of overcompensating for what the concerns might be, just to make sure that you've got enough redundancy in the protocol that you're not relying on one thing to fix the issues.
Thank you. Our next question is asking, what does VOC mean?
VOCs is volatile organic compounds. Great question. VOCs, volatile organic compounds. One of the things we've learned about mold, for instance, is that it will produce microbial VOCs, which are different from mycotoxins. Mycotoxins is the off-gassing of the toxins that mold can often produce, even at spore stage. But VOCs are volatile organic compounds. So it's basically chemical gases that are in the air. You smell them from paint, from nail salons, those kinds of things, acetone, gasoline, all of those produce these VOCs. And so you want to deal with those, because there are a lot of people that are react to those VOCs, especially chemically sensitive folks. And so you just want to be careful that you're actually addressing those as well when you're putting together an indoor air quality solution.
Thank you. Our next question here is asking, so you recommend to clean, disinfect, and thaw before remediation?
Well, if you're talking about mold remediation, there are different protocols for mold remediation as well. So we did not define the difference between sanitization and remediation. But technically speaking, if you're talking about mold remediation, there's two different approaches to a problem. One would be sanitizing, where there's not any visible mold, and that's simply cleaning, disinfecting surfaces. If you're talking about remediation, the definition of remediation is the actual removal of contaminated construction material. So that's talking about tearing out the drywall, throwing it into a bag and carrying it to the outside. So completely different discussion. And today we were talking about sanitizing.
Thank you. Our next question is asking, any recommendation on how to treat our clothes after working at a hospital or a clinic for our cleaning employees? Will the bacteria stay in the clothes?
Well, I have in my home actually an ozone producing machine on my washing machine, and so we don't use a lot of chemicals. I think it's called a pure wash. So we're pretty big on not using chemicals, but I think cleaning your clothes, washing them with the right kinds of detergents or ozone, as I was suggesting, that type of technology will definitely take care of whatever's in the clothes. And that's the whole purpose of washing machine, is actually to remove the bacteria, because it's the bacteria that's producing the odors in our clothes.
Thank you. Our next question we've got here is asking, this is a critical time right now with the COVID-19 outbreak. What would you recommend for sanitization of weekly or daily sanitizing of surfaces? What would be the most beneficial?
Well, what we're recommending is that we not change our regular cleaning habits, although we can see that that is changing. And again, that's not really in my purview. I think that the CDC and EPA, even FDA, are coming out. I think I've used more hand sanitizer in the last 2 weeks than I've used probably my entire life. So I think some of those things are changing. You don't want to be crazy and spend your whole day cleaning, but obviously I think some of that stuff has to be ramped up. Again, I'm going to kind of leave that in the realm of the experts, the ones who are trying to figure out how bad this stuff really is, because I just don't think they've figured that out yet.
Thank you. We've got another question here, and we might have time for one more. So if you're thinking of any questions, everyone, feel free to send some in. The question says, if we're using an electrostatic fogger, but the facility is not maintaining an adequate filtration, change, or maintenance schedule, would that dramatically impact the results of our sanitization and disinfecting? Or how would we know what the schedule should be for the specific filtration system?
Well, yes, and I think what you could do is you could actually establish a filtration schedule system, a maintenance program for them. Some of our training actually does that in terms of saying, here's the problem, here's the solution. Now, if you want to maintain this solution and make sure that the problems don't come back, here's the maintenance program that we're going to put in place to make sure that the problem is going to be resolved. So you remember when I talked about this general three-step process on the sanitization protocol, and I said it includes green technologies, good cleaning products, it includes air filtration and air purification, and it includes lifestyle changes. Well, lifestyle changes is the one thing you have no control over. If you tell someone that they need to change their air conditioning filter every month and they decide they're going to change it every 6 months, you have no control over it. I've actually been in homes, very, very nice homes, where I've said, where's your air conditioning filter that you changed? And they go, oh, it has a filter? So you've got to incorporate, it's almost an education training process for your clients to make sure they understand that you understand what needs to be done. The rest of it is really left up to you. I guess the other example I could use is if you purchased an air conditioning system for your home, it's going to have a warranty, but that warranty is not going to be any good unless you maintain it. And so the idea is there are really no guarantees beyond the day that you finish the sanitization process. There's no guarantee that it's not going to be recontaminated or how long that recontamination is going to last and you need to resanitize. No guarantee unless you've got them incorporated in the process and doing what they should do to make the changes they need to make sure that they're maintaining that environment properly.
Thank you so much, Doug. And thank you everyone for listening and sending in your questions. We hope you are all staying safe and that your staff is staying safe during these times. Again, we appreciate everything today. And so with that, everyone, thank you so much. Have a wonderful week. Of course, please contact us at any time if you need anything. And thank you, Doug, for a great presentation. Bye for now.